Okay, so we're going to get started in just a moment. And I am just going to put the agenda for this meeting in the chat. You can see, if you click that link, you'll see the whole agenda for tonight. But we're going to spend the majority of this meeting talking about the Board of Elections, because I think it's on a lot of our minds. We've all seen, once again, how the Board of Elections let us down in reporting some erroneous election results this last election cycle, and it seems like this happens just about every year in New York. So the main purpose of this meeting is to talk about what we can do as officials of the Democratic Party in Brooklyn to push for improvements in the Board of Election and what we can do to make this better. So we are going to get started. If you can mute yourself if you're not speaking, and if you do have a question, feel free to type it into the chat, or you can use the raise hand function, or when we come to time for questions, if you want to just unmute yourself and ask a question, you can go ahead and do that. Just be sure to be respectful of everybody else here, and if you've already spoken a few times, make space for other people to get their questions in as well. So to start off this discussion about the New York City Board of Elections, I'm happy to have with us here tonight our Assembly member, Robert Carroll, and he's going to speak about what is possible at the state level, what he's working for, and what his priorities are on this issue. And he will take some questions afterwards. So I'll turn it over to Bobby.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Tony, for that introduction. And I don't think I need to tell this group that obviously the Board of Elections is in dire need of reform. It's been in dire need of reform basically since its existence. And it's in need of that reform because the foundation that it's built on, one that is partisan in nature and is fraught with patronage, has led to a board that not everyone who works there, but unfortunately many of the folks who are at the upper echelons of the board are not running a professionalized, competent organization. And of course, unfortunately, year in and year out, we see huge problems when it comes to our elections, especially when either there's large turnout or there is real scrutiny. So I think everyone here remembers when in the Democratic presidential primary in 2016, there were folks who were illegally and improperly purged from the rolls of the Democratic Party leading up to that very contentious election. And of course, just last month, we had the issues with the first ranked choice vote. And this just continues to be a problem and a major frustration. There is a piece of legislation before the board, before the Assembly and the State Senate, to try to fix some of those ills inside the current framework of the Board of Elections. So it would keep the same amount of commissioners, it would keep that it is partisan in nature so that there are an equal amount of Republican and Democratic commissioners, but it would try to professionalize the staff by requiring certain training and credentials, as well as having more oversight and say by the mayor and the city council on who those commissioners are. I support that piece of legislation because I think it's a meaningful step in the right direction. However, I would say that we probably should start anew, and we should find a way to bring the Board of Elections under the purview of the mayor and create a system that is professionalized, that is professional civil servants, very similar to what we see at the Campaign Finance Board, which has appointments by the mayor as well as the city council, that is thought to be run better than the New York City Board of Elections. And look, no system will be perfect. In every system, there will be favoritism, especially when you're dealing with politics. But that system seems to be work better and be more efficient and have less issues. And that's not saying that there aren't some good folks at the Board of Elections who work hard. I know a lot of folks who work there. There are some good folks, and there's some very serious folks who are dedicated to trying to run our elections. And our elections are not easy to run. But we definitely need changes in law. We definitely need to get them more resources from both the state and the city, because if we expect them to run a 21st century operation, we got to make sure they have the funding to upgrade their systems to run a 21st century operation. And we need to change the laws so that it's easier to hire a professional staff. If anybody's got any questions about what we can do or what happened in the last month, I was at a hearing just a week ago about the issues of the election. And I was happy to say that, I pushed back against many folks who tried to pretend that the issue of last month's election wasn't the incompetency at the Board of Elections, but was ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting isn't a perfect system. No system is perfect, but I think it is a much better system and fairer system than just a first past the post closed primary that in the past had allowed for folks to get 20, 25% of the electorate and be deemed the winner, sometimes even less. And so I'm happy that we enacted that. I think it will get better as people become more familiar with it and become more facile with it, because I do understand that there were some people who were overwhelmed by the amount of choices. And I'm hopefully the education will lead to a fact that everyone feels comfortable with that system and everybody participates in the ranking of candidates and not just some people, which did happen in a few races. But I know you guys have a long agenda, don't want to take up too much time, but more than happy to answer any questions anyone might have around ranked choice voting or reforms to the Board of Elections.
Thanks so much, Bobby. So if anyone has a question, you can use the raise hand function. You can type it in the chat or just unmute yourself. And I just want to throw in one quick question. What do you think the prospects are for a constitutional amendment getting started, by the end of this year or, early in next year's session?
Well, I doubt a constitutional amendment would be passed, nor would it matter this year, possibly next year. You would have to pass it by next August. And then we would, when there's the new November election, we would have to, the new legislature that was sat for that term would have to pass it again. And then, of course, it would be brought to the people. The problem with constitutional amendments are they're difficult to get done. They take a long, long time. And so I do think that people are going to try to do this legislatively first, but obviously a constitutional amendment might be necessary. And for some of the reforms I talked about, making the board nonpartisan in nature, that would require a constitutional amendment.
Thanks. Any other questions? Anyone want to jump in? Well, it's good to know that about the constitutional amendment, because we've got that, that could be one target to look at. Getting it done by August of next year would enable it to happen again with the new legislature the following year. If we miss that target, then we're looking at, a whole other, at least 3 years before it could happen again. Is that correct?
Yes.
So good to keep that in mind.
All right, so Gina has her hand up.
Go ahead, Gina.
Thank you. I wondered, what do you think the support is for the things that you're proposing? The odds of getting it done.
Look, I think there's a general frustration with the Board of Elections, but unfortunately, it doesn't rise to the level for a lot of folks in both the Assembly and Senate as something that is must do right now. And so, I think it's going to take a lot of organizing by folks. I think it's also going to remind folks that we don't want to become the laughing stock of the country. And, we're very lucky that it was not a close election between President Biden and former President Trump, because it would have taken till December for us to certify our election. It would have been utterly, utterly ridiculous. And, when the rest of the country sees that we use this new version of voting and the Board of Elections created 135 sample ballots using the exact same names as the candidates, I mean, it looks so foolish. And I think that what it does is, besides looking foolish, which is not the worst thing in the world, it really discredits our elections and makes people not have faith in the accuracy of our elections. And really, it spreads doubt. And we know that doubt has been spread through so many ways through our country, with people not believing in the election results from 2020 to not believing a whole host of things. And so we want to make sure that we are not the reason for conspiracies or rumors or just doubt in our election processes. We want people to think that our elections, which they are fair and open and transparent, and that we have faith that the people we say won did in fact actually win.
So if I would paraphrase what I'm hearing you say, it sounds like you're saying that there's so many other issues on the table that require attention, focus, and activism to make them happen, that this particular issue, even though it has a number of downsides, would need to be prioritized by activists above other issues for us to see some kind of an effect.
Yeah, I mean, I think there will need to be activism around it. I don't think it's a zero-sum game. I think the legislature can do lots of things. It cannot do lots of things. But it's the pressure that folks like yourselves push on the legislature that make it react.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. So I know Bobby has to get going soon, but we probably have time for one more question. Does anyone else have one more question? Okay, well, thank you so much, Assembly Member, for taking the time to speak with us tonight. And you're welcome to stick around, but I know you have other things you need to do, so we really appreciate it. And we'll be following up with you after this discussion with our next plans for this issue.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tony. Thank you to the county committee and all the work that you do. And I know that there's so many people. I see Julie here. I think I see Nicole here. I see a bunch of people from the Brooklyn Voters Alliance and other groups and other folks who've dedicated a lot of time in pushing the Assembly and the State Senate to reform our election laws and to make it easier to vote. And all of that work is so important. And without folks like yourselves who are pushing the legislature to do issues on voting and anything else, things really wouldn't get done. So please keep up the advocacy, and I hope everyone is staying healthy and safe. And I'm sure I'll hear from all of you soon. And so thanks for having me.
Thank you. So we're going to move on with the agenda right now. And I also wanted to say thank you to Doug Schneider and Lori Nipel, our district leaders, for joining us tonight. We're going to have a discussion with them a little further down the agenda. So we will hear from them. But first, I wanted to just say thank you all for joining us tonight. I know we haven't spoken in a while since our January meeting, and all of us have been very busy with the primary and with everything else that's been going on with New York City coming out of the pandemic. But I'm glad we can take this time to connect, and I look forward to when we can, meet again in person, hopefully, towards the fall. We're going to try to put that together. I wanted to give you a little bit of background on what's been happening with the Board of Elections. I'm sure you're all following that. But just in case anyone's not sure why we're talking about this, the Board of Elections is largely controlled by the county organizations, the county Democratic and Republican parties of New York City. And in just about every election year, we've seen the Board of Elections make major mistakes. This year, it was reporting the wrong tallies of votes in a preliminary result. So not the most serious mistake they've made, but it shakes people's confidence. Last year, it was, disenfranchising thousands of people by misprinting absentee ballots and not mailing them out in time. So a lot of people's absentee votes didn't get counted. And in my mind, that's a much worse error. But I think a lot of the problems come down to the partisan nature of the Board of Elections, and that these people are, many of the staff members and the commissioners are chosen by the parties. And since we're all elected party officials, we have a responsibility for asking our Brooklyn Democratic Party to do better in the choices it makes around the Board of Elections. And I'll just share my screen for a few examples of that you can follow up. These are all linked in the meeting agenda. But you can see here, this is a story in Gothamist from last year about the appointment of the commissioner of the Board of Elections in the City Council. And the current Democratic commissioner appointed by the Brooklyn party boss didn't make any public statements. There was no testimony. There were no hearings. She was just appointed. And that's how it pretty much always goes. So, and she didn't have any previous experience managing elections. So, I'm not saying that she's to blame for everything that happens, but it's just such an opaque process. We can't say for sure. And this is another story in the Times. This was from last year and was recently updated about the problems that many employees at the Board of Elections report, just basic incompetence and people not knowing how to do their jobs or not really caring. And certainly that's not everybody, but there are documented examples. And we're going to hear from one of the people quoted in this story later today. I also wanted to share, this is a recent op-ed by the Democratic nominee for Borough President, Antonio Reynoso, and the president of New Kings Democrats, Mariana Alexander. And I think it lays out one proposal for how to fix the Board of Elections. So I encourage you to check that out. But I'm going to stop talking now and stop sharing my screen, if I can figure out how to do that. And I wanted to turn it over to one of our members, who is not a member of the BOE's partisan staff, but a member of the BOE's professional staff. So I think this is not necessarily someone who represents, the party's control of the Board of Elections, but the other side of it, which I think would be good to hear how that side works too, and what a professional Board of Elections might look like. So our member, Ariel Merkel, has graciously agreed to speak with us tonight. Ariel, do you have a moment to speak with us now?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you very well.
Great. So, hi, everyone. My name is Ariel Merkel, and I'm the Americans with Disabilities Act coordinator at the Board of Elections in New York City. I'm just going to start with an audio description. I'm a white woman with green eyes and long brown hair. I'm wearing a blue shirt that has some of my daughter's pad thai on it from dinner. I'm sitting in my bedroom. It has a yellow wall and a painting with underpad lilies behind me. My pronouns are she and her, and I would just like to encourage everyone to provide audio descriptions of themselves in these type of meetings in order to make the space inclusive to those who are unable to use the visual elements of Zoom for whatever reason. So, hi, I'm admittedly a bit nervous about being here because I never know what kind of reaction I'm going to get when people find out I work for the Board of Elections, especially these days. So first, I just want to start by saying, although I work for the board and I've grown to love my colleagues there, I am not here on behalf of the BOE. I'm not a spokesperson for the BOE. This is everything I'm saying is just my own thoughts. And I just kind of want to discuss my experience at the BOE to provide some context with the goal to kind of humanize the tone. but I'm not the right person to ask about hiring and firing practices or restructures or possible paths of reform. I'm happy to listen, but I can't really provide much guidance or suggestions of the things that I don't know that much about. I'm also want to mention I'm a mother of 2 small kids and it's near bedtime, so I hope I'm not interrupted, but I might be because that's Zoom life. So as I mentioned, I'm the Americans with Disability Act coordinator at the board, and I'm a manager that oversees a unit that ensures the electoral process is inclusive to voters with disabilities. I work in the executive office in downtown Manhattan, and although I actively support all of the 5 borough offices, I don't have a lot of knowledge of their inner workings. I feel like a lot of the discussion here is more borough specific. So my work mainly consists of reviewing surveys of hundreds of poll sites. We have over 1,200 poll sites citywide, designing solutions to overcome accessibility issues. We deploy ADA equipment such as ramps and mats to over 600 poll sites on election day. So it's a big project. I also oversee the design and distribution of the accessible absentee ballot, which is an electronic version of the absentee ballot that's used for voters who may not be able to mark a paper ballot because they have blind or low vision, dexterity issues, print disabilities. So that's kind of what I do there. It's a technical position, as Tony mentioned. And when I applied for the job, I was a doctoral student studying sociology of disability and working as a disability integration advisor for FEMA. I was helping them implement more inclusive practices to support survivors of disabilities. I'm sorry, survivors of disasters with disabilities. And I also have extensive work at the UN, working at the United Nations on international disability rights. So all that to say, I was already an expert on the ADA when I began at the BOE, but I knew next to nothing about the electoral process other than my personal experience voting. And although I'm continuously learning about this incredibly complex system, I think it's safe to say that I'm now an expert on accessible voting. And that's the norm at the BOE. Like many other uniquely complicated systems, many people learn about that complex world once they get there. And I just kind of want to stress that there's no entity that is comparable to the New York City Board of Elections. So I'm originally from Buffalo, which is the second biggest city in the state. And even if I was the commissioner of Erie County BOE prior to moving to New York and getting this job, that would hardly prepare me for administrating elections in New York City. The sheer scale of the task that the board does is unmanageable. It's the only BOE in the nation that has 5 different counties, hires tens of thousands of poll workers. I think that it's the biggest temporary workforce in the country is the poll workers. And hosting simultaneous events, 1,200 events all at the same time in temporary locations you don't have control over, you have limited control over. So the New York City Board of Elections manages millions of voters, millions of pens, miles of ramps, tens of thousands of absentee ballots. So I guess what I'm trying to say is even if it was staffed with people with electoral experience elsewhere, I would personally, this is just my opinion, but I personally would argue that a lot of their knowledge would not be applicable to New York City because the New York City Board of Elections has no peer. It can't be compared to other BOEs. And I might be the only person on this call who believes it, and that's fine. But I would argue that it is staffed by professional election administrators, even though I know that many people disagree with that. That's my experience there. That said, it's not a perfect system with perfect people. And I hear the frustration, and I recognize that it seems like every election, the BOE is in the news. When I applied for the job in 2016, I was aware of these issues. A few months prior to me being hired, a bunch of voters in Brooklyn were purged from the rolls. And of course, there was poll site accessibility issues citywide, which resulted in a federal lawsuit that created my job. And both of these issues are serious, but resulted, in my opinion, in real change at the BOE, change that ensured that those issues were never repeated. And in my almost 5 years there have been other issues, as we've mentioned, the vendor misprinting of addresses on absentee ballots, this recent human error of the unofficial preliminary results. And again, I just want to say that these issues aren't repeated. It's not like the BOE is making the same mistake over and over again. And again, I'm not trying to create excuses. I just kind of want to contextualize my admittedly very different opinion from most of the people on the call. And I also want to just say that the last year and a half has been bonkers. While everyone else was working from home, we were deemed essential and required to work throughout the entire pandemic. And that said, we were some of the last essential workers to receive the vaccine. Despite my personal pleas to my elected officials, we didn't get the vaccine until a week or two before the rest of the public did. We experienced outbreak after outbreak, and we buried many coworkers throughout this pandemic. And we had to work through the pandemic because, so folks in Brooklyn only know of, or only are probably thinking of the general election in November and then the recent primary in June. But we had so many special elections between those two. So right after November general, we had a special election in the Bronx on December 22nd, so just a few days before Christmas. Then a special election in Queens on February 2nd, which was literally during a state of emergency. A nor'easter shut down the city, but we still had to hold an election. No one postponed the election. 2 weeks after that, February 22nd, we had another special in Queens. And then a month later, on March 23rd, we had two specials in the Bronx. And each one of these had 9 days of early voting. So in other words, the pre-election of one overlapped with the post-election of the next, and it's been literally nonstop since the presidential general election. And my colleagues are just beyond exhausted. Folks have worked month after month without a day off. We're working ridiculously long shifts, just working constantly. And again, I'm not trying to make any excuses. I just want to provide a context of what the people are going through, because so many of my friends, both in real life and on social media, discuss the BOE as some like boogeyman, faceless machine that represents old school backroom politics, an incompetent machine made of old parts that aren't worth repairing. And these descriptions infuriate me because they erase the actual people who are making the machine of democracy run. People calibrating the machines, proofing the ballot, translating every sign, mail, or email into multiple languages, training poll workers, processing absentee ballots, surveying poll sites, building ramps. The people who do that, the people who have done that nonstop during a global pandemic for election after election. And I'm not going to lie, the BOE is a weird place to work. I disagree politically with many of my colleagues, but I love them and their commitment to democracy and their work ethic, despite what the papers say. The people that I work with are really trying hard to provide the best services. And again, my little slice of the ADA part of the BOE is small, and there's many inner workings that I don't understand on the borough level and other things, but I just wanted to take this opportunity. And again, I'm very anxious about saying all of this, especially that it's being reported, but the team I work with on a regular basis is truly dedicated to providing the best possible services in very difficult circumstances. So just to conclude, like I said, I'm a sociologist by training, and I think it's important that when we discuss systems and organizations, we do not lose the sight of the people who make up those systems and organizations. The people who make up the BOE, like all of us who've been through trauma, deserve just a little bit of grace amongst the criticism. So that's kind of what I wanted to share with everyone. And I don't know if I want to go up to a Q&A right now, but I guess I will, and turn my camera off maybe.
I just want to say thank you so much, Ariel, because I know we're putting you on the spot here, and I really appreciate the everything you said, and I think it really needed to be said, and you said it very well. And I think it's really important that we not demonize or attack the individual people who are working so hard, like you are, to make our democracy run, and that's not what we're here to do tonight. I know that I think I can speak for everybody in this meeting. I think I would love to take a couple questions, but let's be thoughtful and sensitive in the questions as we can, and I'm sure you will. One thing I'd love to understand better is what the distinction is between the technical staff and the people that are hired that have to be a registered Democrat or a registered Republican. And it seems like most of those hires come through the party, the party, whether it's the district leaders or the party boss puts in a name. But that doesn't seem to happen for positions like yours. Can you explain the distinction between those positions?
To the best of my ability, to be honest, I am not well versed in the hiring practices outside of my own experience. Was literally a job posting, and I applied, and the executive management interviewed me several times, and it was between me and someone else, and then they actually offered it to both of us. But my political affiliation does matter to a certain degree. The fact that I am a Democrat, when they're in a pinch, so much needs to be done bipartisan. So sometimes they'll say, like, we need a Democrat to double check this because you need, a Republican and a Democrat. So it's not as though, like, no one knows that I'm a Democrat, but it's not a part of my work, if that makes sense. So for example, when I do poll site monitoring on election day, if I go to a poll site, I need to go with a Republican. So the bipartisan, like, from top to bottom, it's a little weird in that regard. So I don't think it's fair to say, like, my political affiliation doesn't matter, but it didn't matter in my hiring, and it doesn't matter. So the commissioners had a vote on me being hired, and it's my understanding they have to vote for me to be fired. I think that is applicable regardless if you're political or not. But when it comes to, like, how political people are hired, I think that, the people who are a part of that world could answer it a little bit better. I don't know if that was like a non-answer, but.
No, that's helpful. So it sounds like the first thing they asked you when you walked in the door wasn't, are you a Democrat or a Republican?
No, it wasn't until months later.
Okay.
It wasn't until, like, I was going out into the field on election day and they said, are you an R or a D, so we can pair you with the right person in the car, Well,
thanks for that. I think we could take one or two more questions if anyone has anything for Ariel. Okay, well, I think we're going to move on with the agenda, but thank you so much, Ariel, for your perspective and for your time and for all your work.
Sorry, I got a little emotional.
Real quick, in case Ariel has to leave, and just say, first of all, hi.
Hi, how are you, Doug?
Second of all, having worked several elections now with Ariel, she's the person I call multiple times every election to say, hey, is this right? Hey, is that right? Hey, this is what's going on. And is really just the best of what the Board of Elections does, and is an example of exactly what we want every person working at the Board of Elections to be like and to do. So Ariel, I know I say it to you privately, but I want to say it publicly that I think you're an amazing person who does an amazing job, and a real asset to both the Board of Elections, but also to us as voters. And so thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you so much for those.
And I hope
words.
you can get the food off of your dress.
Yeah, probably not. But I also want to say that I'm not like a unicorn. There are other people like me, my team, the people that I work with day in and day out are talented and dedicated. And I'm not saying that there's, it's not a place for reform, but again, I just want to advocate for my colleagues to keep the tone human. That's all. But thank you, Doug.
Yes, thanks, Doug, and thanks, Ariel. Thanks so much for your time, and thanks so much for doing this. So next on the agenda, we are very fortunate here in 8044 to have a number of our members who participate in an amazing organization called the Brooklyn Voters Alliance. I'm sure you've heard of them. They've been doing some work recently on ways New York's elections can be better. So I'm glad that we have Julie Kerr here with us tonight, and I'm going to turn it over to her to make a little presentation about the work that they've been doing.
Thank you, Tony. Hello, everybody. My name is Julie Kerr. I am a county committee member here in AD 44. But I am also a member of the executive committee of the Brooklyn Voters Alliance. And for those of you who aren't familiar with BVA, we are an all volunteer, nonpartisan group working to expand and modernize our elections here in New York City and in New York State. We do a lot of voter outreach and education. We advocated 2 years ago to bring ranked choice voting to New York City. And so we spent a lot of time in the last 6 months doing what we could both virtually and in person to educate voters in Brooklyn about ranked choice voting and how it works and what impact it can have on our city. Another one of the things that we've done, what's been one of our priorities is Board of Elections reform. And to start with that process, we about a little over 2 years ago, we needed to learn more about the Board of Elections and how it works. And we had our experience as voters when we would go to vote. But it's a big, complicated system with a lot of dedicated people who are working there. But as Tony and others have said, has definitely had its challenges. So about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, we started attending the weekly commissioners meetings in person just to get a sense of how things worked and have the opportunity to ask questions. One or more of our members, we would kind of tag team it, going every week or every time a meeting was held. We did that up until the pandemic started. The meetings are always streamed live. But once they went completely virtual, we were still watching them virtually and kind of taking notes. And unfortunately, once they did go straight to virtual, there was no longer a way for the public to ask questions, which was very unfortunate. So from those experiences and the way, some of the errors or unforced errors that have been made around the elections in the last few years, what we started to do was develop a series of principles that we would like to see addressed in all levels of Board of Elections reform that may be coming down the pike. We're not in a position to write legislation, nor are we particularly interested in doing that. I suppose we could suggest legislation, but what we really want to do is just make sure that any legislation that is proposed, that does come into effect, any system reforms that are done, meet certain, address some principles. So I'm going to share my screen so that you can look at some other things instead of just me talking. So this is kind of what our vision for the future of election administration in New York might look like. We are talking about 4 primary principles for election reform. Reforms need to be voter-centric and putting the voter at the front of whatever reforms are put into place. We need a professional Board of Elections system. The Board of Elections needs to be transparent, and the Board of Elections also needs to be held accountable or have accountability. So by voter-centric, we mean that the Board of Elections must center voters and the services they provide to the voters. Our election law needs to center the voters, and any Board of Election reform should also center voters. And this includes the systems, the processes, and the practices of the Board of Elections. Their primary purpose should be facilitating the ease of voting. We have a lot of people registered to vote in New York City and in Brooklyn. We don't have a lot of people who actually show up to vote. And by rebuilding the confidence that people have in our Board of Elections is one of the mechanisms that could hopefully increase voter participation. So voter-centric is really at the top of our principles. Everything needs to feed, everything that's done needs to feed into that, and be made voter-centric. By professional, we need election administrators who are supported and provided with the tools and resources needed to perform effectively. There need to be defined and publicly available standards of knowledge and skills and experience to execute the functional requirements of election administration. We have 10 commissioners on the New York City Board of Elections. Elsewhere in the state, each county has 2 commissioners, 1 Democrat and 1 Republican. These, I think as everyone knows, these commissioners are basically appointed by the county parties, the County Democratic Party and the County Republican Party. These commissioners are very experienced in their line of work, but they rarely have election administration experience, yet they are making the decisions of how our elections are going to be run. So we need to have defined standards for them to, for those individuals who are going to be making those decisions. You know, the same needs to be true for much of the professional. Ariel talked a lot about the technical staff and the amazing things that they do. The professional staff needs to have this similar types of standards. There needs to be a competitive hiring process. It's our understanding that you know, the board of based on the state constitution, the election commissioners and a lot of people on the executive staff need to meet those bipartisan, 1 Democrat, 1 Republican standard. But a lot of the other professional positions within the Board of Election don't meet those criteria necessarily under the state constitution, but have fallen into the kind of patronage appointed by the county parties. If you go to the Board of Elections website, it's really only any of the technical jobs that are posted there. The more professional jobs are never posted there. Those are appointed members by the county parties. So our third principle is transparency. Information needs to be easily available, clear, and usable to the public in regard to how the election process works, the decisions that are made, and who the officials involved are. The commissioners do have a meeting every week, Tuesdays at 1:30. You know, when you hear some decisions there, it's, you know, having attended dozens of commissioners meetings or listened into them over the last 2.5 years, you know, a lot of the decisions are kind of foregone conclusions. They're put forward at the meeting, but there's little or no discussion about them because the decision has already been made, but the official vote is made part of the meeting. So there needs to be more transparency in how the decisions are made. There also needs to be a clear process for public input and participation. As I mentioned before, we had attended these meetings in person before the pandemic, and there was the opportunity for public comment. That's not too long after we started participating, they started limiting public comment to 2 minutes, and I think that might be Brooklyn Voters Alliance fault, so I apologize for that. But since the pandemic, when the meetings are completely online, there's no mechanism in place for public comment or questions. And finally, we need an accountable process. Our voting access, security, and accuracy should be ensured to promote fairness in election administration. Accountability must be answerable to the interests of the voters. The commissioners aren't really accountable to anybody. I suppose at most they're accountable to the county party or the leaders of the county parties, but they're not answerable to the Board of Elections, the State Board of Elections. They're not answerable or accountable to the City Council or the Mayor's office. There needs to be an accountability component to it. So those are our four guiding principles for Board of Elections reform: voter-centric, professional, transparency, and accountability. We see our role in Board of Elections reform as to making sure that these principles in the work that we do and the activism we do with the other groups involved in the city and Board of Elections reform, good government groups, other grassroots groups, that these four principles will kind of be the guiding force as to what the reform process will look like. So I will stop sharing my screen. And I guess I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
Thanks so much, Julie. That was a really comprehensive presentation. Does anyone have any questions for Julie and the work about the work of Brooklyn Voters Alliance? Okay, well, we're going to have a, oh yes, Rosalie, go ahead.
Do you have any idea, or do our district leaders, or does anyone have any idea how widely these four principles are accepted? In general, do people think they're a good idea?
Well, these, I'm kind of debuting these four principles tonight. We've been kind of accumulating our knowledge from our research and the attendance of the meetings in the last 4 years. So we've kind of put just, you know, in the last couple of months started putting together what this framework is, these four principles. So you guys are the first to see them. And we will be, so State Senator Zollner Myrie is holding voter experience and Board of Elections experience hearings starting tomorrow in Brooklyn, and he's going to have them across the state over the next few weeks. He's going to be in Western New York and Long Island and central area of New York. I think he's holding a total of 6 or 7 hearings, culminating with one in Albany in September. So I'm going to be testifying tomorrow, as well as some other of our members, just as private citizens with our own experience. But we're going to start reinforcing these principles starting tomorrow at that hearing.
Thanks so much, Julie. Really appreciate the work you put into that presentation, and I think it's a great starting point for our next discussion. So we're going to continue our discussion, and we'd love to hear from you and from our district leaders in just a moment, but I have one more special guest. In that Times article I shared earlier, which is linked in the agenda, one former Board of Elections worker was quoted, and she is on the Zoom with us. So I am going to introduce Chikava. You have to tell me which last name should I use.
It's a compound first name, Chikava Rosalind T. Chikava or Rosalind.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Chikava. And I am going to turn it over to you. We'd love to hear from you about just some specifics about your experience working at the Board of Elections and some of the problems that you saw there. And so then we can start to, think about what changes to ask for there. So take it away.
Okay, just literally jumping in from outdoors. The first problem that is a root problem is that there's no merit hires. That all of these, there's actually no hires. You're appointed to work at the Board of Elections. You do not apply for a job at the Board of Elections and get a position based on your education, skills, and background. You are appointed by sometimes a district leader. I was appointed after working with the Maslows on petitioning. And I'm so sorry, what is the gentleman's name that passed away? He passed in Queens, but he's a Brooklynite.
Question.
Pardon?
Are you talking about Johnny?
No.
No, she's talking about Lou Fiddler.
Oh, Lou.
Yes, Lou Fiddler. Thank you. Lou Fiddler appointed me to my position, and I came on as a temporary clerk. I had a lot of skills to contribute. I've been a trainer. I've been in marketing. I'm very good at organizing and producing people, but there's a culture of making sure people feel insecure, right? So I'm not going to be put in a position and attain a level of expertise and experience, ownership of my job, and a sense of some control, autonomy in my career. You can at any time be plucked up and put in the back to sort mail or just moved around. So there's not a big investment in the department. So it's broken up into different departments, but they're only really wanting people they've chosen for management to have any sense of ownership and expertise in these departments. So there's voter registration, election day operations, which would handle all of the training courses and assigning people on election days and early voting too. Then there's absentee, and then registration, absentee, cancellations, which is essentially the mailroom, and training falls into EDO. And then there's a front office staff, and there's various overlaps from there. Now, most of the people are not ever really planning to leave. It's either you've come into this job because your mom works there, your uncle, and this is like the best you can imagine for yourself, and you're going to haul it out over the course of your life. You know that it is not going to improve. There's a sense of hopelessness, or there's a set of people who might have had a hard time finding jobs, especially like after the 2008 recession, and in mid-career, late career, they found themselves without a job. And luckily enough, somebody got them an appointment to this job that starts at $15 an hour. Now, everyone starts as a temporary clerk unless you've been especially put in place. And when I initially started, I thought, okay, well, it's fine. You start as a temp and you do it for 30, 60, 90, 180 days, some reasonable span of time. And then you either go on to do something else or they onboard you. And I thought, for instance, that would be when you get a proper salary. But the salaries only go up very incrementally unless you become part of a special crew of people. And to get hired, generally speaking, you had to go through Frank Setio to get hired if you were a Democrat. Like that would be not even district leaders, like to get fully put on staff, it would be, he's the bottom liner on that. And I don't know if it is that way covertly anymore, or if it has actually switched to the new party leader and she's able to say when people get hired on staff and where they're going to be put. There's some slightly, in a corporate world, these practices are not legal, this thing where you have people temporary. There's a very fuzzy line in the election law because even though on one end, it's a city of New York job. All of the rules for temporary workers, because of the election law, the rules don't apply. You're not really a temporary or provisional worker as you would be in any other agency in the city. You also need to know that it's the only agency where you do not take a civil servants test. So there's absolutely no standard of merit for working there. That is not to say that people are not devoted and giving their all, but when you have layers and layers of unqualified people managing staff from a diversity of backgrounds, a diversity of education levels, a diversity of literal discipline and acumen, and people that are there because like a couple of state assembly people's siblings and family members have jobs there. What is I'm sorry, I'm losing my names because I didn't get to like slow down. And Daniel Ortiz is the deputy chair in Brooklyn, and his brother, Freddie Ortiz Jr., is the chief technician in Manhattan, and their father, Freddie Ortiz Sr., was the previous Speaker of the House who was just unseated recently. Now, Freddie Ortiz Jr. is the highest paid person in the entire agency. Daniel is, I want to say that people get better at the job while they do it, but he is not qualified for his position, nor is Ray Riley qualified for his position. He is the chief, nor is anyone on the executive level qualified for their positions. You will notice if you take a nice little trip to LinkedIn and plug in Board of Elections, New York City, you will not find a profile for senior management on there. All you are going to find are profiles of poll workers that just kind of needed to boost up their resume. The more you research at the executive level who the Board of Elections is, it's very disheartening how cold the trail is, how there's not industry experience, like real leadership experience, organizational, operational experience running the thing. It's so completely nepotistic. And the way they win is because it's a fairly complicated 700-page law that takes, that I've been told by, in a working group we had with NKD on the matter, in our explainer, that it takes about a 12-year cycle through legislation to get anything changed. So the idea of anything shifting is highly unlikely.
Yeah, I think that's a reference to the constitutional amendment that we were talking about with the assembly member earlier, that there is a window, but it's tricky. We would have to get a constitutional amendment passed in August of next year, and then another one passed in the new legislative section the following year, and then the following year would have to be voted on by the voters. So, there's a chance, but a lot of things have to come together. I'm just jumping in here because we do need to get on to the next section of the agenda, but I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us and share your perspective, Chikava. And I wanted to see if any of our members had a question to ask you before we go on.
I would like to I have a question for the wisdom of the group, because I believe that the best way is for the people of New York to sue the state legislators and the Board of Elections. I believe that is, you just explained a 3-year cycle to get an amendment accomplished. So I wondered if anyone has started looking into that. But otherwise, I'm happy to answer questions. I know it was very cursory and not a lot of my story, but
I appreciate it, and I'm sorry that we're so pressed for time. We do have some lawyers on the call, so I think when we get into our group discussion, we should certainly talk about what the possibilities would be for a lawsuit. That's a great suggestion. Does anyone else have a question for Chikava before we move on? I have one really quick question just from reading the newspaper articles about this. I've seen it reported that sometimes Board of Elections employees are asked to make political contributions to particular candidates and are given promotions sort of in exchange for those. Did you ever experience that or witness that?
Well, and they're not necessarily appearing to be political contributions, but you need to go to the dinner in someone's AD, so that dinner might be the contribution. But I was not surprised to see that, because that contribution can also be in the form of club dues.
Right. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. And if you want to stick around, what I'd like to do next is I'd really like to hear from everybody and get some perspectives. But right now, since we have our district leaders on the call, I would love to hear their perspective on what it's been like, what their interactions have been as far as the Board of Elections and how county plays a role in staffing it. And if they have ideas for, what we should be pushing for from the party, how the party could do better in this regard. So let's start with Lori Nipel. Do you want to start off this discussion?
No, I'd rather you start with Doug.
Okay. Doug, do you want to jump in?
Sure.
Thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah, first of all, thank you everybody for being here. I hope everybody's having a great summer. I think really Ariel did a really great job at a couple of things. I think number one, I think really humanizing the people who work there, but also, pointing out that there's a lot of competent people who work there. I think that there's a systemic problem, and we can talk about that systemic problem without vilifying, the people who do the job and do the job well. Listen, in short, I think that it's easy to say, right? It should be nonpartisan, and it should be professional. I tend to agree that and I've said it for a long time, that it should be a civil service job. It should be well compensated for the reasons that Ariel pointed out, that just the tremendous work. There's always an election in New York. And so I really think that we have to look at those structural issues. The one thing that I want to take issue with is the criticism and what I will call innuendo about the Brooklyn commissioner. I think that she is eminently qualified. I think she is more qualified than pretty much anybody else, any other commissioner. And I will point out that her predecessor, Dr. Flateau, was very, very well regarded and thought of as an excellent commissioner. And if you were to put their qualifications side by side, she blows him out of the water. I think I said this at the time. I think that the criticism of our current commissioner, Democratic commissioner's qualifications are steeped in sexism. I think that if a man came forward with that resume, people would not have the same problem. And so whatever we think of a partisan system, I think we have to be careful to not vilify people simply because our county leader initiated the process with them. I don't like that system, but I will say that having been in the room and grilled her, and having watched my colleagues really take the obligation seriously and really grill her, she is knowledgeable. She is incredibly competent. And, listen, I'm a little bit biased, but as a lawyer, our job is often to learn completely new things. Every case I get, I'm learning a new business. I'm learning a new industry. I'm learning, new applications of the law. And so I really do take issue with that one part of the conversation. I have zero interaction with the Board of Elections on personnel issues, other than the poll workers. I've never suggested somebody work there. I've never asked for somebody to work there. So I can really only speak about my experience with poll workers. Obviously, a single day job, which is full of graft, to the point that I didn't even realize. And I talked about it a lot when I was running, but I really didn't realize until I got there. And I learned that the Board of Elections, the poll workers, are actually kept on a computer system that identifies which and whether and which that person is sponsored by a district leader. So they have a system that they can look up, Nicole Hunt, and then we'll see whether or not she came to her position through a district leader or applied directly to the Board of Elections. It's not informal, it's their actual computer system, which is unbelievable to me. And I refuse, and I have refused to engage in that. But like I said, it's a structural issue. It's a political issue. It's a legislative issue. The only other thing I wanted to add, and then I'll hand it over to Lori, is that also don't forget that the commissioners are an advise and consent for the city council. So the city council also holds a hearing and has to approve the commissioners. So there is that level of oversight that I also wanted to mention. But that's my contribution. I will hand it over to my esteemed colleague, and I will say nobody works harder in the administration of elections outside of the Board of Elections than Lori Nipel. And I think sometimes that goes overlooked. It certainly doesn't go overlooked by me, Lori, because I'm the one trying to help you, and I see how hard you work.
Thanks, Doug, and thanks, Lori, as well, for being here. And before we turn it over to Lori, I just wanted to go back and address, because I'm perfectly, willing to be wrong, and I would love to be wrong about what I said earlier. I was literally just quoting from the one newspaper article I could find about the Brooklyn commissioner at the Board of Elections. And it said that she, prior to her confirmation by the city council, made no public statements, gave no, public hearings, and met privately with the council's entire Democratic delegation, and then I guess met with the district leaders. So you have information that we don't have, and I think that gets to the heart of the problem. Because maybe she is eminently qualified for this position, but from what I could tell in my research before this session, I could find that information nowhere. And I feel like we as Democrats, and as citizens, voters in New York, should be able to find that out about the 10 people that run the Board of Elections.
Tony, I circulated her resume when she was under consideration, and people can look at her actual resume. You can look at her actual resume. I think that I just have to disagree. And fair enough. We're allowed to disagree. There's a lot of things that are really, really objectionable. A lot of things that are done really, really poorly. But I'm gonna defend, the process in which Brooklyn chose its commissioner, as well as her qualifications.
Thanks, Doug. And to answer Chikava's question in the chat, we're talking about Rodney Pepe Souvenir, and I may be mispronouncing that name.
No, you got it.
Okay.
If I could interject really quickly. So number one, Doug, fantastic beard. That is glorious. I applaud you for doing that during the summer where it's ultra hot. But I think, the fact that you had to circulate her resume and basically serve as her advocate sort of speaks to the larger point that this information is not really accessible, right? Like, how can we as members of the Democratic Party be able to confidently say, oh yeah, this person, has gone through this process of being verified and her credentials and everything is an open record, where you have to sort of circulate things behind your particular circle of members of the party, right? Like, it just does not seem to promote the transparency that we should really be about.
I mean, I don't want to have a theoretical conversation, right? But you think of any other appointment that goes through advice and consent, there's a council hearing on it. And it's not like we get circulated for any other commissioner role. I get that there's some difference here, but it still goes through council advice and consent, right? That's a public forum. So there is that opportunity. Now, has the council traditionally slacked in that job because they just rubber stamp commissioners? 100%. But that's, again, a structural issue that we have a new council coming in. There's going to be a new person assigned to the committee that does that oversight. We can put that pressure on them to do a better job. But this is not cloaked in secrecy. It goes through the council.
Thanks for that clarification. And if anybody is confused about what we're talking about, I encourage you, in the agenda for the meeting, there's that Gothamist article that started this whole thing. Because my interpretation may be wrong. Take a look at it and make up your own mind. But without further delay, thank you for waiting, Lori. I want to turn it over to our district leader, Lori Nipel.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Bobby Carroll, and Julie Kerr, and Ariel, and Chakava, and thank you, Doug. So I think this is a lot to deal with in a short time, but let me give you somewhat of an overview of my dealings with picking and choosing things that have been said. I think Doug is 100% right in terms of the choosing of the commissioner, whether it's done on an open basis, it can be more transparent. Unfortunately, I believe in this case, there was the resignation of Flateau rather quickly, and they had to fill the spot, although I think that took a little time. I have to tell you that under Vito, when the commissioner was appointed, and she also was quite competent, Mary Rosati, who was the equivalent of Danny Ortiz at the time, sat in a leaders meeting literally crying because Vito had not even given her the heads up or had introduced her to the proposed commissioner. So there's a lot that goes on. I want to talk about some of the work I do with the poll workers and the differences in terms of jobs between the district offices and the executive offices, which are totally different. I'll say at the onset, I do believe that if the system is changed, and should be changed in many ways, that if you want to retain some of the employees that are there, or all of them, they should be going to go through some sort of civil service exam to prove their competency, because you do have some that are not very competent and some that are quite overly competent. It's a real mixed bag. In all the years I'm a district leader, I only appointed one person to the borough office. And she's still a temp. This is also, I think, since 2008, 18 rather, and she's still a temp. I've asked several times for her to be elevated, and she hasn't. And she's quite competent. Okay, so what Doug is saying in terms of the way poll workers are chosen is very, very complicated. And I believe it's part of also some existing law, although I can't cite it at the moment. So it leaves a huge, tremendous job on me. We get our own poll workers that have been working with us for 1 million years. We get a lot of new poll workers that are very competent and want to be civic minded and offered their services for the day, which is long and grueling, and the pay is pretty minimal at this point. At one point, it was a prize and people were begging you. Since early voting has started, especially during the pandemic, and these last couple of years, we have to fill 9 full days of poll workers. In that, we have to fill this last election. I had 5 separate sites. I had to pick coordinators, affidavit clerks, line monitors, information clerks, accessibility clerks, scanning clerks, and everyone wants to be appointed because they get a bonus if they work 4 days and they want the money. I mean, it's as simple as that. So I've always tried to interview the people that I've gotten and made sure they were quite competent. But then what happens is people call up the board and the board gives them my phone number and sometimes Doug's phone number. And then I have to somehow incorporate them into, I don't have to, most district leaders don't. But if I feel they're somewhat competent, I also want to give them the opportunity to serve like everybody else. They shouldn't be discriminated against. So it makes the job even more difficult because I've already assigned everybody working on it for 3 months. And now I have a slew of about 30 more people that I have to fit into slots. So it's a very, very difficult situation. And I don't know if all district leaders take the job as seriously as I do, but I do. And I want to make sure that each of our poll sites runs very smoothly. And I believe that they do. And I just wanted to explain to you the complexity of that job and what it entails, because most people have absolutely no idea. They just show up. Now, you have to also understand that from what I gather, it was nonpartisan to begin with. And when Tammany Hall was in power, they basically filled every single spot. So in terms of trying to reform the system, they made it bipartisan so that there would be an equal number of Democrats and Republicans. What typically happens in Brooklyn, and I can't speak for the other counties, because obviously the dynamics are very different, but in Brooklyn, especially in our district, we have a very low Republican enrollment. We have an almost non-existent Republican district leader who's being replaced or has been replaced. I haven't even met her. I don't even know her name. They cannot fill any of the spots. So many of the time, unless there's somebody in the Board of Elections pool, I am able to then put some Democrats in some Republican spots, only because there's a lack of people. So on one hand, there's multiple people wanting to work, and on the other hand, to fill the other side, there's sometimes a real void. So I could go on. That's just an overview. Are there incompetents working? Absolutely. Are there competents working? Absolutely. And as Ariel said, a lot of people put a lot of time in under very difficult circumstances, especially during the pandemic. The ones I know are extremely dedicated and have worked really hard to make sure that things run smoothly. Now, the top of the ladder, I can't speak to because I don't know who put them in and I don't know what their, again, what happened was human error. Has it happened way too often? Absolutely. It is a very complex agency and a complex system. I think that we need to work to make it better and improve it on many levels, including civil service. But I do think that you have to understand the overall complexity and the differentiations between each county, because that is quite a difference. So I'll stop. I'm sure I have a lot more to say. I'd rather take some questions and maybe make things a little clearer.
Thanks very much, Lori. I appreciate you breaking all that down because I learned a lot from that. And we are coming close to 9 o'clock, so I'm thinking about how we can continue this conversation.
I'll say one more thing, one quick thing.
Okay.
That in addition to all these 9 days and 1 day prior that they have to go down, I then had the double headache of then only dealing with the 44th for in my regular many poll sites for election day, which occurred 2 days after the after the early voting stopped. Now you have to understand, I have absolutely no access to the Board of Elections computer. So I could put in the names and I fill out a little grid and I assign very clearly. It's almost like a Rubik's Cube. Everything has to fit together. And then once it gets put into the computer, nothing is where I put it. So I then have to spend hours and hours and hours on the phone trying to redo everything I did, reinventing the wheel. I have to say this last time I had the most competent person I was working with. And I have to say there's a woman at the board who's Danny's assistant, Kadisha, who has been excellent throughout the process, and she has helped me where many others have not. So it's a double headache, but
Right.
try to work it through.
So it sounds like the one thing we could ask for in the short term is a better process for provisioning poll workers, coordinating that better. That seems like a simple ask. So my thought on how to, we can take a couple questions, but I think what I'm going to do is email all our members a form where they can put their suggestions, their questions, and then we'll follow up over email with Doug and Lori and the assembly member, and we can try to keep this conversation going online, because I don't want to keep everybody here all night.
Well,
but if
I'd like to have a few questions if anybody wants to ask.
Of course. So does anyone have a quick question for Lori? Okay, I think people are seeing where we're about 8 minutes from 9 o'clock. Oh, Glenn does. Okay, go ahead, Glenn.
Hi, Lori. I just want to start off by saying that I have a great deal of confidence in you and the amount of time you're going to take for anyone you might appoint, that you'll do some due diligence, that they are competent. But I'm wondering what percentage of other people who have the ability to appoint do you think are really taking the time and effort to make sure the people they're appointing are in fact competent? Because it seems to me this whole system of appointing is a mistake. It allows for too many, or I don't know what percentage, but some percentage of people to get jobs, permanent jobs, not poll worker jobs, but permanent jobs that probably don't belong there. But I'd like to hear what you think about how this works. Thank you.
Give me a specific question, Glenn, because I really didn't get to the crux of what you wanted to know.
Well, what percentage of people who have the authority to appoint people do you think are going to take the time to make sure they're appointing competent people?
It varies. It definitely varies. Some people will take anybody that will bring them a lot of signatures or, help in some way, a form in the old clubhouse type atmosphere. And some will, like myself, although I don't know, I don't think there's many, give up lots of time, chances to actually earn money by working, and, even some fun events by doing all this work, and parts of vacations as well. So I wish more would, but it's asking a lot. It's asking a lot. It's an unpaid job. The hours are grueling when you put in and you take it seriously and professionally, and you're always expected to turn up at 1 million meetings. You're being pulled in 100 directions. And beyond that, you're a social worker, because every one of these poll workers that know you call you with problems, helping them get in a nursing home, helping the kid get in school. I mean, everything that an assembly office should be doing, but they don't have that connection. So they all come to me. So over the years, there's been innumerable people that I have helped in one way or another. And my phone can ring 6 a.m. till 1 a.m. That's all part of it, but that's how I deal with it. And I don't know how others do.
Thanks so much, Lori. So I have two competing impulses here. Sorry, Glenn. I just wanted to say a couple things. I want to I want to try to end the meeting not much after 9, and I also want to give anyone who hasn't had a chance to speak at all tonight, but has a thought on this, a chance to express that quickly, because I don't want everybody to feel like we're just talking at them and we're not giving them any space to speak. So is there anybody who hasn't spoken tonight who wanted to add something to this conversation? Okay. Well, I don't want to shut the door on this conversation because I think that we just started this process. So I'm going to follow up with an email with all our ADC members, and I'm going to create a place where you can ask questions to any of the people that spoke today, and I'll direct it to them. Or you can propose ideas, solutions. We should come back to what Jakava suggested. If anyone wants to explore the idea of a lawsuit, we should think about what we want to agitate for at the next county committee meeting, which should happen in September. And I want to keep working on this problem because I think it's clear that there's things that we could do better. So if no one else has anything to add,
it's New York state law, and the way Bobby described it is it does have to go through two assembly sessions and then a constitutional committee. I don't see any other way around it. It is the law.
Yeah. So to change the bipartisan structure, we'll take a constitutional amendment. But I guess what I'm wondering is, as members of the Democratic Party, if there's something we can do to incrementally improve the system in the short term until we can get that constitutional amendment. But we do have a little bit of ADC business to take care of. So I want to close this segment on the BOE and thank everybody who participated. And I want to turn it over to our secretary, Francis Sakata, who is going to introduce a new website that he has been working on for our ADC.
Tony, I have to put my kids to bed a half hour ago, so I'm going to hop off.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your summer. I'm going to throw my email in the chat if anybody needs to reach me about anything, either about this topic or anything else. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Doug.
All right, thanks, Tony. Yeah, guys. So what I've been working on is a website for our ADC. Unlike other sites that are sort of built with WordPress or any kind of what you see, what you get editors, this is sort of built from a code base up. And the idea is to build the tools and sort of everything that we would need to do to update with blog posts, announcements, meetings, and things like that, while keeping things nice and tidy. And because I'm a web developer, if we ever need some kind of feature, we can always sort of go through this process of discussing and seeing if it's feasible and prototype it and then deploy it and so on and so forth. So I will share my screen and then I'll do a quick walkthrough. So something to think about right now is that this is not the completed site. It's a rough build, but it's live and available through the URL, and we will share it at the end of the meeting. So I'm going to go through it. So again, pretty bare bones, but this is what we're working with right now. So right now we're just sort of making sure that we have linkages to everything here. So when we talk about the Brooklyn Democratic Party, we're talking about Brooklyn Dems, excuse me. We have very straightforward navigation bar. We have information about what an ADC is. If you need to pull the rules of the government, we can access it through the Brooklyn Dems site. This was available through some CDN that they had before, but that expired. So I found a replacement. I also downloaded this. So instead of linking to a URL, we'll just serve it as an asset. So we have this information. And as you can see, if a site does not exist quite yet, you see this little pound sign, that means we will build it. We have information on officers. As you can see, we have Courtney, we have Tony, we have myself. I am only at the top because I was the first one to make it. I will be implementing some kind of order or hierarchy thing, so that way Tony, as the chair, would be on top. So we are only missing from Diana. And we have Courtney here, and you can see her adorable child there. Look at it. We'll have a section here for the district leaders. Nothing yet. We will have a link here for minutes and ADC rules. And then for news articles, which will basically be either blog posts or something we'll import from our RSS feed, it'll show up here. And then we can build some other functionality like a search bar, so you can query for particular blog posts or things like that. And then we can also implement those across minutes from the meetings and so on and so forth. Just gonna check the chat real quick.
Oh, that was just me.
Oh, okay, cool. All right. So you might feel like this is not super impressive, cool, you spent a lot of time on this. I mean, and the answer is going to be yes and no. What really happened here is that I built a really nifty application with a completely detached back end and front end. So if we want to get fancy, we can start building some, front end components with, sexy pieces of technology like React JavaScript or Vue.js and so on and so forth. We built a templating engine using HTML, and we extended using an engine called Jinja. This is written in Python. So we're able to create these applications. We're able to load environmental variables. We're able to do a bunch of stuff here. So this is quite technical. You don't have to worry too much about this. But the idea here is that this is custom, and we can extend it as we need it. And you'll also notice that these, this is some code that I have here for data models. So this suggests that we're connected to a database. And this is how we access some of our data stuff. So at some point, we're going to create a means for everyone to create their own user accounts if it's something that is required, if it will help serve our purpose. We'll allow people to create little bios about themselves. And then this is how we're able to sort of populate some objects here, right? Blog posts over here, so on and so forth.
I'm sorry to jump in, Francis, but I just wanted to get to a couple other things. So yeah. if you, but thank you so much for sharing this. And if you can drop the link in the chat, then everybody can check out the website. And if you have any questions, just email the ADC email, respond to any of those emails, and I'll pass that on to Francis so he can straighten that out. And you don't have to create an account right away. For now, you can just take a look at it, and we'll have the minutes of this meeting and all our past meetings up very soon. The link is there in the chat if you want to check it out. Thanks so much, Francis, for all your work on this.
And just a quick note, once the site is ready to go live, so to speak, we will have it at an actual web domain. It won't be this little, Python Anywhere thing.
Right. It'll say ad44.live or something like that.
Right.
Great. Thanks, Francis. So we're going to wrap up in just a few minutes. Wanted to do a quick update on our committees, but first I also wanted to say congratulations to our member Shahana Hanif, member of the county committee, and now our Democratic nominee for City Council in District 39, which is where I live, and I know a lot of you as well. But I also wanted to say congratulations to all the candidates, including our district leader Doug Schneider, for running a really positive issue-based campaign. And none of them were tearing each other down. There was a lot of good information shared, a lot of public forums. So I feel like that was a great example of how to run a campaign. So I really appreciated all the people, and I know a lot of people on this call volunteered in that campaign for different candidates. And I think it was really impressive work from everybody. So moving on, we were going to, I was going to update you on the county committee meeting from last December. As you know, there is an ongoing lawsuit, but it has not gone anywhere. The county leadership has filed a motion to dismiss, and as far as we can tell, that motion, the judge is still making up his mind on that motion, whether to dismiss the suit or continue it. So hopefully someday we will know if that last county committee meeting from December will stand or if it'll be overturned. But there should be another county committee meeting this year. We're expecting in the fall. So we will be asking, our district leaders and the county leadership for details about that meeting soon. And hopefully it will take place. So I will certainly send you any information as soon as I have it. And now I just wanted to do some real quick updates from the subcommittees of this ADC. So Andrew Dona Couch formed a committee on the study of the democratic process at our last ADC meeting, and they did meet, and Courtney Adrian was there, so she's going to give a quick update on that committee's work.
Sure. It was actually a very successful, hopefully, yep, I think you can hear me. If narrowly tailored committee meeting. The study of the democratic process is sort of a lofty name, but they really decided what they wanted to do is focus on educating county committee members in advance of the large county committee meetings, so that way we can be as effective as possible there. So They definitely need some help. If you are a person who would like to do that as we get close to our next meeting, they would definitely like to recruit you. Please feel free to email me. I'll put my email in the chat. And basically, they would like to educate and coordinate all of you about what our strategy should be going into the next meetings, and perhaps even about other things such as when lawsuit decisions comes down, how to break down those decisions for people, just like generally helping county committee members know what the heck is going on. So it was a good meeting, and we'd love to have you join. That's about it.
Thanks, Courtney. And that's a good reminder that there should be a county committee meeting this year, but the big one, the organizing meeting, will happen again next year, hopefully on time in September. And it's never too early to start planning your strategy. So email Courtney. Her email should be in the chat if you are interested in joining that committee's work. Debbie Herdan wasn't able to join us tonight, but I know the Transportation Safety Committee that she leads did meet once and talked about what they can do about street safety. So if you would like to get involved in that committee's work, you can just email me and I'll put you in touch with Debbie. I'll put my email in the chat, but you also get all the ADC emails, so you can just reply to any of those. And none of the other committees are currently active, but we are interested in, supporting committee work for anybody who wants to get involved. There was with the pandemic over the past year, everyone's been pulled in a lot of different directions. So we're not expecting everybody to have regular meetings and be doing all these things all at once. So we just want to support what the members want to do when they want to do it. So if there's a committee that you're interested in joining, or if there's something you want to get involved in, you can always email. So I think that we made it through just a few minutes after 9 o'clock. But I wanted to once again make the offer for anybody that hasn't had a chance to speak tonight, because I feel like it's been a few of us talking most of the time, and I really appreciate you staying and listening. If anyone has thoughts on the Board of Elections, on county committee, on any of the things you discussed, or if you just want to share something that you're doing in our district that you'd like people to know about, this is your time. So please raise your hand or just unmute yourself and speak up. Courtney, go ahead.
I would just like to say that I think, no matter how good the resume is of people who are being appointed to the board, really the problem is that the board needs to be hiring a completely different set of people with a completely separate skill set, and that isn't who Doug and Lori appointed through no fault of their own, because it's not who they were presented with. I think we need people with modern data skills to run this operation, and it's just not even close to something that anyone is able to vote on. That's all.
Thanks for that. And does anybody else have anything they want to say before we close out? This is your space.
I was putting my children to bed during some of the other discussions, so I was listening but unable to read the chat or respond. So I do want to also, I think that it was mentioned in the beginning, but I do want to remind everyone that, one person shared her experience, which is from the Brooklyn Borough office. And I just wanted to kind of highlight that was one of the 5 different borough offices. And then there's the executive office. And again, say that I applied with a job posting online. I'm not the norm. I'm not saying that I'm the norm, but I did want to clarify that there is the absolute discussions of that everyone is appointed and no one has professional skill set, blah, 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 blah. I just kind of wanted to, again, close because I was unable to kind of engage at that moment that, that might be one person's experience, but there are other components to the reality. That's all.
Thanks for that. I think I'm still processing. I mean, there was so much information to take in tonight. So I'm sure other people are feeling that way too. I think we're going to have to find a way to continue this conversation. But one takeaway that is starting to form in my mind is that there's, it seems like the very highest levels and maybe the administrative levels after that are maybe where, the patronage and the nepotism and that sort of thing seems to be centered. And not that those people, aren't very qualified, but, is that, what signal does that send to the voters? If you have to know somebody, if you have to call up, the party leader, to advance in those positions. And if you don't, then you're stuck at a low tier. Is that something we should be
That's what I
thinking
wanted
about?
to clarify is I'm an upper management, so I report directly to the executive management, but I am a senior manager and I was hired in that position permanently. I didn't have to crawl my way up as was described. And again, her experience is her experience, and I don't want to invalidate that. I just want to raise more voices and kind of pluralize the context, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Ariel. Yes, it's definitely more complex than, and I need to learn more about it. And I see Gina has her hand raised. So if anybody needs to go, we are past 9. You're welcome to go, and I appreciate you so much for coming. We will post the recording of this later. But if anyone wants to stay and continue to talk, I would love to do so. Go ahead, Gina.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I unmuted myself already. I think the takeaway from what Ariel is saying and the different viewpoints that everybody has, one important takeaway, I should say, is that it is likely that the counties, the boroughs, are different, just like the county committees in the boroughs are different. So for us being Brooklyn-based, it sounds like we need to educate ourselves a little more on what the exact and correct process is and what the environment is within Brooklyn so that we can really tackle that. And I think the previous speaker from the volunteers, sorry, I don't remember the name.
The Brooklyn Voters Alliance, Julie.
Thank you, was extremely helpful because they've been sitting in on so many meetings. So it sounds like there's, in addition to whatever we might want to take as action, some research would probably be beneficial.
Thanks, Gina. Any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, I just want to say something, and I don't have the clarity of it right now, but I know about, I'm going to say 6 or 7 years ago, the board somehow got funding and actually had an outside agency overseer a lot of what they were doing and writing up reports. I don't know if it lasted a year or two and then it ended, but it was very beneficial in getting a lot of the organization together and kind of whipping them into shape. I don't think that's existed in quite a few years, but it may be a way to kind of raise the bar where it needs to be.
Thanks, Lori. Glenn, do you have something?
Thank you. I would just like to point out that anytime you have a system that allows for people to appoint people, then you have to question what are the qualifications of the people with the power to do the appointing. These people aren't necessarily people who have gotten their degrees in human resources. So this is a very problematic type of a way of appointing people and putting people on the Board of Elections, to whatever extent that's true. I'm sure some of the people that are appointed are good, hardworking people, but there's no way to know. This is a very bad system. And if we're going to do anything to try to improve things, I think this is the weak point in the system. I'm done. Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn. And I'm just realizing that I forgot an important detail on the agenda. I forgot to recognize our treasurer, Diana Gonzalez. So I'm going to call on Diana if she could speak for just a minute on how, if you are so moved, how you can support the ADC, because you may have noticed that the meeting invitation, when you registered for this, it said to reply to operations at Stanford Symphony. And that's because I'm using my work email for work Zoom account for this meeting, because the ADC does not have much money for a Zoom account. So Diana, if you could speak to us about that for just a moment.
Gladly. No worries, Tony. So yeah, we are live and open for taking contributions. I will be working with Francis in the coming weeks to put a mechanism on our website for taking contributions. But for now, if you feel the very, very urgent need to contribute, this is all the information you need right here. We do have an acronym, so you do not have to write the 44th Assembly District Democratic Committee out on the check. You can just write 44 ADDC and send it to me here. If you don't have a pen nearby to write this information down, you can absolutely get in touch with anyone on the ADC leadership, and we will get that information to you. And that's it. That's all I got.
Thanks, Diana.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, we're not asking you for money, but we are just saying that the ADC does cost some money, not very much, a little bit of money to run. To have our required annual meeting, we need to send a lot of mailers out to everybody, unless you opt to just get them by email, which we'd love it if you did. And we also have to, rent space, get a Zoom account, things like that. So that would be the only thing we would ever use that for. Maybe, someday if we have the funds, have a big public forum for all the candidates for a party office or something like that. There's other things we could do in the community.
Yeah, and the voting software we've used in the past cost a couple dollars. A domain name is going to cost a couple dollars. It's all these little incidental bits and pieces that executive committee members have been paying for out of their own pockets. So.
Thanks, Diana.
Mm-hmm.
So does anybody else who hasn't had a chance to speak tonight have anything they want to say before we close out?
I actually have some opinions on the whole debate about the Board of Elections, as you know, Tony. I will say that just kind of as a rule, my experiences with the central office of the Board of Elections have been pretty positive, and my experiences with the county office of the Board of Elections have been pretty bad. And that's something you can really take to the bank. And you do hear people who work in the political world going like, oh, you're gonna have to go to the borough office with that issue, good luck. Versus, oh yeah, you just talk to so-and-so at HQ and they'll take care of it right away. And so I think if people are wondering why they're hearing such incredibly different stories of what life at the Board of Elections is like, that's why. It's a huge agency, and it is very possible for very different types of experiences to happen. So yes, and then there is this reality that the county leader through the commissioner does wield a huge amount of power over things like hiring and promotions. Lori's story of, yes, she's still a temp worker, however many years later. Well, Lori, that's what you get for voting with the reformers a bunch of the time. And that kind of is the reality of jobs of loved ones are held hostage in exchange for loyalty. And you really can't divorce the issues at the Brooklyn board from the issues with the kind of top-down leadership that many of us have been advocating against. Thanks, Lori. So yeah, that's my take on it. That's my summary. I'll also tell you that, from my brief experience as the executive director at the county party, there's a lot of other stuff that goes wrong at the borough boards that never make the papers. When I was there, we discovered that the borough board had misplaced a bunch of petitions for county committee candidates and hadn't realized that there were a number of contested races and hadn't put those contested races on the ballot. And we had a special election, which is when all the county committee members vote on who the Democratic nominee is going to be. And we literally didn't know what to do because all these people thought they were county committee members and they couldn't all be county committee members because they were representing the same seats. And we just swept the whole thing under the rug, pretended like it never happened. No one ever heard boo about it. Everyone got to vote. It was absolutely not a legitimate vote. And you know, I was there for 5 months. So imagine how often something like that is happening that we never hear about. And so I'm always so grateful for the people like Ariel who are doing really, really good work and are the shining stars of an institution that has good things about it and has bad things about it. And I do want to agree that, you know, it's really not about attacking everyone at the institution, but looking at specific issues. So that's my opinion, and thank you all for listening. And I'll put my address in the chat for those of you who asked. Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much, Diana. And I'll also include that information in the email that I'll send out after this meeting, the address if you would like to send a donation. So before we close out, obviously this conversation is going to continue. There's a lot more thinking that we need to do on this. So I will create a form where you can enter your questions, your ideas on this, and then, you know, we'll see if we want to have another meeting, or if we want to, you know, just have a chat online, or even meet in person at some point, now that that's sort of possible. So there'll be more to come. But thank you so much to everybody who joined us tonight. Thanks to the Assembly member, Bobby Carroll. Thanks to our district leaders, Lori Nipel and Doug Schneider. Thanks to my fellow officers, Courtney and Diana and Francis, for all your work. And thanks to all of you for taking the time to speak with us tonight. Oh, and thanks, of course, to Julie for her amazing presentation, and to Chikava and to Ariel. Really appreciate your contributions. So check your email. I'll send a summary and ways to follow up and continue this conversation very soon.
Thanks for organizing, Tony.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Bye.